When did you start apologizing for growing older? Was it the first time someone stopped looking at you, or the last time you looked at yourself and didn't recognize who was staring back? They say beauty fades. But what if that's the oldest lie we've ever believed? Listen closely. Because hidden beneath your skin is a secret the world has forgotten. Sparkles. A woman does not lose her beauty with time. She begins to carry it where no eye can reach. And those who truly see, will never look at her the same again. You see, beauty was never just a face. It was a frequency. A feeling. A silence between words. And the women who carry it now, they don't announce themselves. They don't need to. They enter the room with no perfume, no noise. Just something unamiable trailing behind them. Like incense clinging to old robes. Or a prayer that once passed through their bones, and never left. Let me tell you about one of them. Her name was Eleanor. Presence that radiates warmth. There are presences that demand attention. And then there are presences like Eleanor's. Not loud. Not dazzling. Not meant to impress. But quietly unforgettable. You don't notice her right away, not in the way we notice glamour or grandeur. No, Eleanor was not a spectacle. She was a sanctuary. That morning, the farmer's market was alive with its usual rhythms: the chatter, the bartering, the metallic clink of coins being exchanged. Children tugging at their mothers. Vendors shouting about tomatoes. Life, buzzing in 100 directions. And then she stepped into that flow, and the air didn't stop, but it shifted. Subtly. The same way a breeze lifts the corners of a still lake. Soft, imperceptible, but deeply felt. She moved slowly. Not out of fragility, but out of reverence for space, for people, for the moment itself. She didn't speak first, she noticed first. She made eye contact as if she were opening a door and inviting you to rest inside. When she asked about your life, she wasn't collecting information. She was gathering you. Every answer you gave felt held, as if your story was something sacred. Not something to be hurried past. But something to sit beside. I remember watching her speak to the baker. She didn't just ask about bread. She asked, "How has the week been treating you?" And then she waited. Waited in a way that said, "I'm not afraid of your truth." That's rare. We live in a world where everyone wants to be heard. But no one wants to witness. Eleanor witnessed. Not with judgment. Not with advice. But with that sacred stillness that said, "I see you. And I'm not looking away." She reminded me of a Zen teaching I once read. When you sit with someone in full presence, you heal them without saying a word. That was Eleanor. A healer, not with remedies, but with attention. Not with noise, but with stillness that made others soften. She never talked about mindfulness. She embodied it. She didn't preach presence. She became it. And that, en vie, is what makes certain women beautiful in a way time cannot touch. Not because they turn heads, but because they turn hearts open. They remind you of who you are beneath all the masks. Sparkle's presence is not about being looked at. It's about being there fully for someone else. And when you meet someone like that, you don't forget them. Because what they give you is yourself, seen, heard, and loved without needing to earn it. Elegance in simplicity. Margaret never chased fashion. She chased truth. In the way fabric touched skin. In the way a hemline whispered modesty. In the way a single pearl could hold decades of love and memory. Her closet wasn't curated by trends, it was curated by time. There were skirts with loose stitching that held the scent of rosemary from summer gardens long gone. Scarves with faded dye, dyed with herbs she'd once grown. Shoes that carried the dust of wedding halls, funerals, libraries, and kitchen floors. Every item she wore had witnessed her life. And so, when she wore them, she didn't wear clothing. She wore a chronicle. She wore her becoming. She never tried to look younger, she tried to look honest. And in doing so, she became radiant. I once asked her, "Don't you miss dressing up like the old days?" She smiled. That slow, amused smile of a woman who has outgrown the questions the world still clings to. And she said, "No dear. Dressing up is not about covering myself. It's about revealing how far I've come without needing to say a word." That stayed with me. We are told that elegance is about lines, symmetry, brand names. But Margaret showed that elegance is about quiet alignment with the truth. The kind of alignment where your clothes and your soul finally agree. Her beauty wasn't performative. It was earned. Through loss. Through love. Through letting go of the need to be anything other than real. This is Vio Thuong impermanence, not as an abstract idea, but as a way of dressing. A way of living. She didn't resist the changes of time. She let them sculpt her. Not into something harder, but into something softer, wiser, and breathtaking in its gentleness. Her elegance was not in her jewelry, it was in the way she smoothed the napkin before placing it in her lap. Not in the brand of her shoes, but in the way she walked like someone who forgave the world a long time ago. Not in her makeup, but in the way she let her eyes speak more than her lips ever needed to. Sparkle's elegance, she taught me, is not something you wear. It's something you release. Once you no longer need the world to define you. And when she entered a room, no one gasped. They simply breathed easier. Eyes that reflect compassion. There are women who wear jewels. And then there are women whose eyes become jewels. Not for how they shine, but for how they hold the world. Linda had those eyes. Not shimmering with youth, but shimmering with something far rarer. Understanding. She didn't just look at you. She looked into you. And when she did, you didn't feel small. You felt safe. Like something soft inside you had finally been given permission to breathe. She never forced conversation. But somehow, people spoke. Spoke of things they didn't plan to share. Spoke of griefs long buried. Spoke of joys they didn't know still lived in them. And Linda just listened. With her eyes. No judgment. No impatience. Only presence. At every gathering, she found the ones others overlooked. The shy ones, the quiet ones, the ones who laughed too loudly because they were afraid of being forgotten. And she welcomed them with a gaze. As if to say, "I know you. Even if no one else has noticed you yet. I see you." She didn't need to speak much. Because her silence was full. Full of awareness. Full of kindness. Full of that rare kind of attention that doesn't try to fix you, but simply accompanies you. Exactly where you are. That is too by compassion. Not just as sentiment, but as a way of being. A gaze that heals. A presence that invites you to come home to yourself. Linda's eyes reminded people of who they were. Before the world told them who to be. When you sat across from her, you didn't feel judged for your mess. You felt honored for your humanness. She once told me, "I don't need to give people answers. I just need to give them a place where their pain is allowed to speak." And she did. Without therapy degrees. Without any title. Just with her compassionate gaze. Which landed on the soul like morning light on a frost-covered leaf. Soft, quiet, and utterly transformational. Linda wasn't the kind of woman who filled a room with noise. She filled it with permission. To be gentle. To be messy. To be whole. She wasn't trying to be beautiful. And yet she was. In the way a still lake reflects the sky. Or the way a flame flickers in a lantern and makes you want to stay a little longer. Some people leave a mark by what they say. Linda left a mark by how deeply she saw. Graceful aging with acceptance. Helen was not afraid of mirrors. She met her reflection each morning. Not with criticism, but with curiosity. As if to say, "What stories will my face tell today?" Her silver hair flowed like moonlight. Not styled to perfection, but gathered with care. As if each strand had earned its right to shine. She never dyed it. Never tried to chase a past version of herself. Because she understood something the world often forgets. Beauty is not a memory, it's a presence. And she was fully present. Her hands bore the softness of wear. Knuckles round from time. Skin thin as memory. But when she held your hand, it felt like you were being held by every moment she'd lived. Every meal cooked, every child comforted. Every loss endured without turning to bitterness. Her wrinkles weren't lines. They were verses. Each one written by laughter, grief, rain, sunlight, and the long, slow grace of surrender. Once, a young woman asked her, "Don't you miss your younger face?" Helen chuckled. Not mockingly, but with the gentleness of someone who has outlived illusions. She said, "Why would I miss a girl who hadn't yet learned how to forgive herself?" And in that moment, I realized, she wasn't aging. She was ripening. You see, Boang Xe letting go is not a one-time act. It's a posture of the soul. A way of releasing what no longer serves. And allowing what is to simply be. Helen let go of comparison. Let go of apology. Let go of the desperate desire to stay unchanged. And in doing so, she became more radiant, not less. She didn't walk like someone trying to stay young. She walked like someone who had survived. And blessed. Every season of her life. She wore her age like some women wear perfume. Not loud. But lingering. You caught it in her gestures. In her patience. In the way she poured tea as if time were infinite. Aging, for Helen, wasn't a loss. It was a gathering. Of grace. Of peace. Of stories worth telling slowly. Confidence rooted in self-awareness. There's a kind of confidence that doesn't walk ahead of you. Or behind you. But with you. Quiet. Solid. Like the earth beneath your feet. That was Clara. She didn't speak to dominate a room. She spoke to bring the room into presence. When she entered, no one turned their head in awe. But within minutes, you realized. You were leaning in. Listening more closely. Softening your voice. Matching your breath to hers without even knowing why. Because Clara didn't project power. She embodied it. Not the kind forged in ambition. But the kind tempered by years of knowing who she is, and not needing to prove it anymore. She was a retired schoolteacher. But not retired from wisdom. And you could feel that. In the way she folded her hands during conversation. In the pauses she allowed before responding. In the way she asked you questions that lingered long after she left. Her beauty wasn't in her posture, though she stood tall. It wasn't in her skin, though it carried light. It was in her anchoredness. That rare thing in today's world. A woman who does not flinch in her own presence. And this, en Viet, is what the Buddha called Nghepa. The law of karma, not as punishment or reward. But as the slow unfolding of the inner seeds we plant through our actions, our thoughts, our choices. Clara had sown mindfulness for years. Sown dignity. Sown small, deliberate moments of truth. So now, in her older age, she harvested that stillness. That composure. That voice that no longer shook when she said, "I don't know, and that's okay." Her confidence wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. It was in the way she disagreed with grace. In how she held her ground without making others feel small. In how she could walk away from noise, because she no longer needed applause to feel worthy. That's the kind of confidence only time can teach. It isn't built in youth. when we're still rehearsing who we are. It's built in the quiet years. The ones filled with loss, change, reflection. Clara had known heartbreak. She had made mistakes. She had disappointed others. And more painfully herself. But she stayed. Stayed with the discomfort. Stayed with the questions. Stayed long enough to watch shame dissolve into clarity. So now, when she walked into a room, she didn't chase validation. She simply stood in her truth. And that made her magnetic. People admired her not because she demanded attention, but because she gave permission. Permission to be imperfect. To be evolving. To speak softly and still be heard. She once told me, "There's nothing more beautiful than a woman who has stopped asking the world for permission to exist." And truly, isn't that the essence of aging with power? Confidence that whispers, "I have nothing to prove. No one to impress. And everything to offer. Simply by being who I am." Resilience through life's trials. Some women grow stronger by building walls. But some, like Rose, grow stronger by leaving the doors open. Even after the storm has torn the house apart. She didn't wear resilience like armor. She wore it like linen. Soft, breathable, weather-worn. Stitched with memory. Rose lost her husband one winter evening. He kissed her cheek, closed his eyes, and never opened them again. There was no crescendo. No dramatic farewell. Just silence. And then, emptiness. For months, she moved like fog. Present, but untouchable. She answered questions with nods. She folded his shirts even though he wasn't there to wear them. Grief, for Rose, was not loud. It was a room she stayed in. Longer than anyone expected. She didn't rush out. Didn't distract herself. Didn't pretend. She let it reshape her. And oh, how it did. It didn't make her bitter. It made her deep. After a time not measured in clocks, but in heartbeats survived. She began to appear again. At the soup kitchen. At the library, reading to children. At the bus stop, helping strangers carry heavy bags. She didn't talk about her pain. She transformed it. Silently. Daily. This is Coda, the truth of suffering. The Buddha taught not to avoid it, but to understand it. To hold suffering in our hands and ask, what now? Not why me? But how can this shape me, without breaking me? Rose didn't fight suffering. She welcomed it like an old companion. And in that friendship, she found strength not of the body, but of the spirit. She once said to me, "The world thinks I'm strong because I kept going. But the truth is, I kept going because I learned how to sit still with what hurt." That is the kind of resilience no book can teach. The kind only lived pain can carve into your being. A strength that is not in the shout, but in the stillness that doesn't collapse. She didn't wear success on her sleeve. She wore softness in her eyes. And people felt it. Even children leaned toward her, drawn to something they couldn't name. Something safe, and ancient, and kind. Because Rose wasn't just someone who'd been through a lot. She was someone who had become more gentle because of it. True resilience is not about bouncing back. It's about bending toward grace. It's about letting life break you open. And still choosing to remain soft inside. In a world that celebrates toughness. Rose taught us the sacred strength of tenderness. She taught us that healing is not a destination, but a devotion. To waking up each day. And loving again. Even if your heart trembles in the attempt. Inspiring the younger generation. Some women speak wisdom with their words. But the rarest speak it with the way they live. Joan didn't stand at podiums. She didn't post advice or call herself a guide. But every time she walked into a room, You could feel it. The gravity of a life lived fully. Young women noticed her. Not because she tried to be noticed, but because she radiated peace in a world full of noise. She didn't rush to speak, didn't offer unsolicited guidance. And yet, when you sat beside her, somehow, you began asking questions you didn't even know you were carrying. There was something about the way she poured tea, the way she listened without interruption, the way she folded a napkin and made it feel like ceremony. The young didn't flock to her out of curiosity. They came because they felt safe. Safe to be messy, to be uncertain, to be unfinished. Joan didn't tell them what to do. She reminded them what they already knew. Beneath the chaos, beneath the fear, beneath the craving to be someone, was the truth that they already were enough. She lived with Chanya mindfulness not as ritual, but as rhythm. Her life was slow, but never stagnant. Intentional, but never controlling. When she walked as if every step mattered. When she spoke, her words tasted like still water. And when she looked at you, it felt like the part of you that was always rushing, finally sat down. One afternoon, a young woman whispered to her, "I hope I become like you when I'm older." Joan smiled gently and said, "Become fully yourself and you already will be." That's who she was. Not a mirror for imitation, but a window into what was possible when you live with inner alignment. She didn't fight age. She translated it into patience, softness, spaciousness, into a language the young didn't yet speak, but somehow understood. And in that way, she became a kind of elder that the world doesn't have enough of. Not one who commands with answers, but one who invites you to your own knowing. Legacy is not what you leave behind. It's how you make people feel while you're still here. And Joan, she made every young woman feel like her questions were not burdens, but seeds. She didn't give them maps. She helped them plant gardens inside themselves. And long after she was gone, those gardens continued to bloom. In voices, in choices, in lives she would never see, but had already touched. You and I, we were never meant to stay young forever. But we were always meant to grow beautiful in ways the world cannot measure. The lines on your face? They are not signs of fading. They are sacred calligraphy written by laughter, by longing, by love that didn't give up. So if one day you feel unseen, unheard, unneeded, I hope you remember this. True beauty does not ask to be noticed. It asks to be lived deeply, gently, honestly. And if your heart still aches to be understood, know this: you are not alone. You belong to a quiet lineage of souls who have found radiance in simplicity, and power in kindness. This is the beauty of age. And it's whispering to you even now. If this story touched something silent in you, there are more whispers waiting. Here, at Whisper of Age, we don't chase time. We honor it. So stay. Sit with us a while. Subscribe if your soul is tired of noise and hungry for truth. Because in the end, the most beautiful people are not the ones who have never been broken. They're the ones who kept loving anyway.